Some truths don't announce themselves with fanfare. They arrive quietly, at a red light on an ordinary Tuesday, in the eyes of two children crossing a street. Ethan Cross had built an empire by never looking back, by keeping his focus razor sharp on the future he was constructing brick by careful brick. But the past has a way of finding you, especially when you've spent years convincing yourself it doesn't matter. In 24 hours, he would sign documents that would make him untouchable. A public figure, a success story, proof that ambition and discipline can overcome anything. But first, he had to survive one crosswalk, one glimpse, one moment that would force him to ask a question he'd spent 6 years avoiding. Sometimes the life you didn't choose comes back to show you what you lost. And sometimes, if you're brave enough, it gives you one last chance to choose differently. This is a story about the invisible cost of success, about the children we don't know we've left behind, and about what happens when a man who has everything realizes he might have nothing that actually matters. What would you sacrifice to know the truth? What would it cost to finally face what you've been running from? If you want to see how far courage can take you when it arrives 6 years too late, make sure to follow this channel, leave a like, and comment below where you're watching from. Because this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about responsibility, redemption, and what it really means to be a father. The traffic light turned red just as Ethan's car glided to the intersection on Maple and 6th, 3 blocks from the house he'd been planning to show Caroline for weeks. His fiancée sat beside him, scrolling through something on her phone, her diamond engagement ring catching the afternoon sun in small, predictable flashes. He'd rehearsed the moment 100 times in his head, pulling up to the driveway, watching her face light up, hearing her say yes to the life he'd built for them both. But then he saw her. Not just her. Them. The woman stepped off the curb with 2 boys flanking her sides, their small hands gripped in hers. They moved in perfect unison, like a single organism split into 3 parts. Ethan's breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. The boys couldn't have been older than 7, maybe 8. Dark hair the same shade as his, the same angle to their jawlines, even at that age. The same way their shoulders hunched slightly forward when they walked, like they were perpetually bracing against wind that wasn't there. His hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles blanched white. Caroline said something beside him, something about the neighborhood, about trees, about how quiet it seemed, but her voice reached him as if through water, distorted and distant. The woman in the crosswalk hadn't looked up yet. She was focused on the boys, adjusting the backpack strap on the smaller one's shoulder, the gesture so practiced it seemed almost unconscious. There was a weariness in the way she moved, a heaviness that hadn't been there 5 years ago when he'd last seen her face this close. No, 6 years. It had been 6 years, 3 months, and however many days he'd stopped counting after the first 100. The light was still red. Time stretched and contracted in strange ways. Ethan watched as they reached the center of the crosswalk. That's when one of the boys, the taller one, turned his head and looked directly at the car, directly at him. For a second that felt like an hour. Their eyes met through the windshield. The boy didn't smile, didn't wave, just looked. It was the kind of look that children give when they're trying to figure out if they know someone, if they should know someone, if there's a reason their chest suddenly feels tight and they don't understand why. Then the moment broke. The woman, Emma, her name was Emma, would always be Emma, tugged gently on their hands, and they continued across. She still hadn't looked at the car. Maybe she hadn't recognized it. Maybe she didn't care. Maybe she'd trained herself to stop looking for things that hurt. The light turned green. Caroline touched his arm. "Ethan, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." He forced his jaw to unclench. "I'm fine. Just thought I saw someone I used to know." "Oh yeah? Who?" "No one important." The lie tasted like copper on his tongue. He pressed the accelerator and turned right instead of going straight. Caroline noticed but didn't comment, probably assuming he was taking some scenic route to surprise her. The truth was he couldn't drive past them. Couldn't risk Emma turning her head at the wrong moment. Couldn't handle the possibility of her seeing him, seeing Caroline, seeing the diamond ring and the expensive car and the version of himself that had moved on so completely, so cleanly, so finally, except he hadn't moved on at all. His mind raced backward through dates and timelines he'd deliberately kept blurry. They'd ended things in March 17th to be exact. He remembered because it was St. Patrick's Day, and the bars had been full of people celebrating while he'd sat in his apartment feeling like his chest had caved in. She'd been the one to leave. Said she couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep waiting for him to be ready for something he clearly didn't want. She'd been right. He'd been 29 and terrified and building a company that consumed 18 hours of every day. A family felt like a luxury he couldn't afford, a risk he wasn't ready to take. But when exactly had it ended? The official breakup was March 17th, but they'd still been sleeping together in February. He remembered Valentine's Day, remembered her disappointment when he'd shown up 3 hours late with wilted flowers. And before that, January. There'd been that week in January when they'd tried to fix things, when the sex had been desperate and sad and felt like goodbye, even though neither of them had said the words yet. December. They'd spent Christmas apart. She'd gone to visit her sister in Oregon. He'd worked through the holidays. November. They'd fought about the future. She'd asked him point blank if he ever wanted kids. He'd said, someday, in the tone people use when they mean never. October. They'd been happy in October, hadn't they? Or was that September? The math assembled itself in his head with sickening clarity. If those boys were 7, maybe 8 years old. Ethan, you just passed the turn. Caroline's voice cut through his spiral. Sorry, distracted. I'll loop around. He pulled into a gas station parking lot and sat there with the engine idling. His phone showed 4:12 p.m. In exactly 24 hours at 4:12 p.m. tomorrow, he'd be standing in a conference room with his lawyers, his investors, and 3 journalists from major financial publications, signing the deal that would take his company public. It was the culmination of 10 years of work, the moment that would cement his reputation, his legacy, his entire carefully constructed future. And he'd just seen 2 boys who might be his sons. Caroline was talking again, something about dinner reservations, but Ethan's hands had started trembling on the wheel. He felt like he was watching himself from outside his body, seeing a man who'd built his entire life on the foundation of not asking questions he didn't want answered. It had worked perfectly until today, until one red light and one crosswalk had cracked that foundation clean through. I need to make a call, he heard himself say. Work thing. Give me 5 minutes. Caroline sighed but nodded, returning to her phone. Ethan stepped out of the car into the late April heat, his shirt already sticking to his back. He walked to the edge of the parking lot, where a chain-link fence separated the gas station from an overgrown field. His mind kept returning to that moment in the crosswalk, the way the boy had looked at him. Not with recognition exactly, but with something, a pull, an instinct. The same instinct that had made Ethan's entire body react before his conscious mind caught up. The same instinct that animals have when they sense their own blood. He pulled out his phone and opened a browser, his fingers clumsy on the screen. Searched for the elementary school in the neighborhood where he'd seen them. Roosevelt Elementary. He scrolled through their website until he found a photo gallery from last month's spring festival. Clicked through images of face painting and 3-legged races and bake sales. And there, in the background of a photo of someone's art project display, 2 identical faces. Blurred, distant, but unmistakable. The caption read, Roosevelt students enjoying the festivities. Someone had tagged the photo. He clicked through, found a parent's Facebook page, set to public, scrolled through until he found a clearer picture from the same day. 2 boys standing side by side in matching shirts holding cotton candy, their faces finally visible enough to confirm what his gut already knew. They had his eyes. His exact eyes. That specific shade of gray-green that he'd inherited from his own father, that he'd never seen on anyone else outside his family. Ethan's phone slipped from his hand and hit the pavement. The screen didn't crack, but the sound made his heart lurch anyway. He picked it up with shaking hands and stood there in the parking lot of a gas station on a Tuesday afternoon, his entire world tilting on its axis. 24 hours. He had 24 hours before he signed documents that would make him a public figure, before his life became a matter of shareholder concern and media scrutiny, before every decision he made would affect thousands of people and millions of dollars. 24 hours to find out if he'd spent the last 6 years running from a truth he'd been too cowardly to face. He looked back at the car. Caroline was checking her lipstick in the visor mirror, oblivious. Beautiful, accomplished, appropriate Caroline who fit perfectly into the life he'd designed. Who'd never asked him about his past because she'd assumed it didn't matter, because he'd presented himself as a man without loose ends or lingering ghosts. Ethan pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. When he lowered them, the world looked exactly the same, but felt completely different, the way everything does when you suddenly realize you've been reading the map upside down all along. He walked back to the car and slid into the driver's seat. "Everything okay?" Caroline asked. "Yeah," he said. "Everything's fine." Another lie. He was building a tower of them now, and he could feel it starting to sway. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He told Caroline he had pre-meeting jitters, which wasn't entirely untrue. She'd kissed his forehead and rolled over, her breathing evening out within minutes, while he lay beside her staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift across the plaster as cars passed on the street below. At 2 a.m., he gave up pretending and moved to his home office. The room smelled like leather and expensive coffee, decorated with the awards and framed articles that told the story of his success. On his desk sat the folder his lawyer had prepared for tomorrow's signing. Contracts, disclosure statements, press releases already written in that confident language that assumed everything would go exactly as planned. Instead of opening that folder, Ethan opened his laptop and began excavating the past. He started with his old email account, the one he'd barely used since switching to the corporate domain. Searched for Emma's name. The results loaded slowly, like his computer was reluctant to resurrect what he'd buried. 47 messages. He clicked on the oldest one first, from 8 years ago, back when everything had felt possible and uncomplicated. "Hey stranger, you left your jacket at my place. Come get it this weekend. I'll make that pasta thing you like." Such ordinary words. He could hear her voice saying them, could picture her apartment with the kitchen that was too small and the couch that sagged on one side. He scrolled through more messages, plans for dinner, complaints about her boss, a photo of a sunset she'd wanted to share, the digital breadcrumbs of a relationship that had felt solid until it wasn't. Then he found the gap. November through December of that year, the messages became sparse. January, they picked up again, but the tone had shifted. More formal, more careful. February showed only 3 exchanges. March had 2. The last message from Emma was dated March 23rd, 6 days after she'd ended things. Just 3 words. "Please stop calling." He didn't remember getting that message. Or maybe he did and had chosen to forget, had let it disappear into the chaos of building his company, of proving to everyone, including himself, that he didn't need anyone, that he was better off alone and focused. Ethan pulled up his calendar from that year, reconstructed the timeline with the precision he usually reserved for financial projections. They'd broken up on March 17th. But when had things actually ended? When was the last time they'd been together in any way that mattered? He found it. January 14th. They'd met for dinner at that Italian place near her apartment. He'd been late, as usual. She'd ordered wine and was halfway through her second glass by the time he arrived. They'd argued, he remembered that now, about commitment, about the future, about whether he was capable of thinking about anyone other than himself. The argument had ended the way their arguments always ended back then, in her bed, with apologies that felt sincere in the moment but never quite translated to changed behavior. That would have been right around the time. If she'd gotten pregnant then, the boys would be exactly the age they appeared to be now. But she would have told him, wouldn't she? Ethan opened a new browser tab and searched for information he should have sought 6 years ago. Pregnancy timelines, early signs. When women typically find out. The information loaded in cold, clinical paragraphs that turned human experience into data points. 6 to 8 weeks after conception, most women know. That would have put Emma at late February, early March. Right when their relationship was actively dissolving, when every conversation felt like standing in a building that was already on fire. He tried to imagine what that would have been like for her. Finding out she was pregnant with twins, while watching him pull further away every day, while listening to him talk about the company, the investors, the future that seemed to have space for everything except her. His phone sat on the desk beside the laptop. He picked it up, put it down, picked it up again. It was 3:17 a.m., an insane hour to call anyone, let alone someone he hadn't spoken to in 6 years. His thumb hovered over the search icon. He could find her number. People weren't that hard to find anymore, but what would he even say? "Hey, sorry to bother you in the middle of the night, but are those boys I saw at the crosswalk yesterday mine? Just curious. By the way, I'm getting married and going public with my company tomorrow, so if they are mine, could we maybe keep this quiet for a bit?" The thought made him physically ill. He set the phone down and pressed his palms against his eyes until colors bloomed behind his eyelids. The rational part of his brain, the part that had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing, tried to take control. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe this was just paranoia and guilt manifesting as pattern recognition. Maybe those boys just happened to look like him. Maybe Emma had moved on, met someone else, built a life that had nothing to do with him. But the other part of his brain, the part that operated on instinct and emotion and the kind of knowing that doesn't require proof, that part was certain. Those were his children. He'd looked into their eyes and seen himself looking back, seen his own father's eyes, seen 3 generations of genetic inheritance compressed into a moment at a crosswalk. Ethan opened another tab and searched for the neighborhood where he'd seen them. Found real estate listings, demographic information, average incomes. It wasn't expensive, not poverty, but not comfortable either. The kind of neighborhood where people worked hard to stay afloat, where every unexpected expense could tip the balance. He thought about Emma's job back when they dated. She'd been working at a physical therapy clinic, good work but not lucrative. If she'd been raising twins alone for 6 years. His throat tightened. He stood up and paced the office, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. Through the window, the city stretched out in patterns of light and shadow. Somewhere out there, maybe 15 minutes away by car, Emma was probably sleeping. Or maybe she wasn't sleeping either. Maybe she lay awake sometimes thinking about the choice she'd made, about whether keeping those boys from him had been protection or punishment, or simply survival. The clock on his laptop showed 4:33 a.m. In less than 12 hours, his lawyer would call to confirm final details. In 13 hours, he'd need to be showered, dressed, and mentally prepared to become a public figure. In 14 hours, he'd be signing documents that would change everything about his life, about his obligations, about who got to ask him questions and what answers he owed them. He had exactly 11 hours and 27 minutes to decide whether to do what his entire adult life had trained him to do: compartmentalize, rationalize, move forward, or to do what he should have done 6 years ago: stop running, turn around, and face what he'd left behind. Ethan sat back down at his desk and opened a blank document. Typed 4 words: "Things I need to know." Stared at them for 5 minutes. Deleted them. Closed the laptop. Some questions once asked couldn't be unasked. Some doors, once opened, changed the shape of every room behind you. He went back to bed as dawn began turning the sky purple. Caroline stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Ethan lay beside her, counting her breaths, counting the hours until 4:12 p.m., counting all the ways his carefully constructed life was about to come undone. Ethan woke at 7 a.m. to Caroline's alarm, his body heavy with the kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. She was already up, moving through her morning routine with the efficiency of someone who'd never questioned whether the day ahead would go exactly as planned. He watched her from the bed, memorizing details he'd stopped noticing years ago. The way she tilted her head while applying mascara, the small sound she made when her coffee was exactly the right temperature. "Big day," she said, catching his reflection in the mirror. Her smile was genuine, proud. "How are you feeling?" "Good," he lied. "A little nervous." "You're going to be amazing. This is what you've worked for." She came over and kissed him, tasting like mint and certainty. "I'm showing a property at 10, but I'll have my phone on. Call me after?" He nodded, and she left in a cloud of perfume that cost more than Emma probably spent on groceries in a month. The thought arrived unbidden and filled him with shame so acute he had to sit down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. At 8:30, Ethan called his assistant and told her he had a personal matter to handle before the meeting. She sounded concerned but didn't push. He'd never missed an important commitment before, never even been late. That reputation bought him a few hours of trust, and he intended to spend it. By 9 a.m., he was in his car heading toward Roosevelt Elementary. The same route from yesterday, but everything looked different in the morning light. The neighborhood revealed itself more clearly now. Houses that needed paint, yards that were loved but not landscaped, cars that ran but didn't shine. This was where Emma lived, where his potential sons were growing up. He parked 2 blocks from the school and walked. The spring air smelled like cut grass and exhaust fumes. A few other parents were making the same journey, most of them women, some holding smaller children by the hand. Ethan felt conspicuous in his tailored pants and button-down shirt, even without the jacket and tie he'd normally wear. The school itself was older, probably built in the 60s, red brick with metal-framed windows. Kids poured through the front entrance in colorful waves, their voices creating a sound like birds before a storm. Ethan positioned himself across the street near a bus stop, trying to look like someone waiting for public transportation, rather than someone conducting surveillance on his own possible children. He saw them at 9:14. The boys arrived walking between Emma and an older woman he didn't recognize, maybe Emma's mother, though he'd never met her family. Emma was laughing at something one of the boys said, her head thrown back in a way that made Ethan's chest constrict. She looked tired but happy, worn but whole. The complete opposite of how she'd looked the last time he'd seen her, when her eyes had been red and her voice had been steady only through obvious effort. The boys were talking over each other, competing for attention in that way siblings do. The taller one carried a poster board tucked under his arm, probably for some class project. The smaller one had a dinosaur keychain hanging from his backpack that bounced with each step. They were so animated, so present, so utterly real in a way that made yesterday's distant glimpse feel like a dream. Emma bent down to adjust the smaller boy's shoelace. As she retied it, she said something that made both boys laugh. The sound carried across the street and hit Ethan like a physical force. That laugh. He knew that laugh. It was his laugh, the one that came from deep in the chest, the one his own mother used to say could fill a room. The older woman touched Emma's shoulder and pointed at her watch. Emma nodded, gave each boy a quick hug, the kind that's routine but still means everything, and watched them run toward the school entrance. They moved in sync even when running, their strides matching, their backpacks bouncing in rhythm. Emma stood there watching until they disappeared inside. Then her shoulders dropped slightly, like she'd been holding tension she could only release once they were safe. The older woman said something and Emma nodded, managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They turned to leave and Ethan instinctively stepped behind the bus stop shelter, his heart hammering. He waited until they'd walked half a block before following at a distance. They turned onto Maple Street, the same street from yesterday's crosswalk. Emma and the older woman talked quietly, their body language suggesting the comfortable familiarity of repeated conversations. After 2 more blocks, they stopped at a small house with gray siding and white trim. The porch had a swing that needed paint. The yard was neat, but minimal. A tired Honda Civic sat in the driveway, probably 15 years old but clean. The older woman went inside while Emma checked the mailbox. As she sorted through envelopes on the porch, Ethan noticed her hands. They moved with a slight tremor, or maybe it was just the way the light caught them. She paused on one envelope, stared at it longer than the others, then shoved the whole stack under her arm and went inside. Ethan stood at the end of the block feeling like a criminal. He was spying on a woman who'd once known every scar on his body, who'd once trusted him enough to fall asleep first. Now he was a stranger lurking outside her house, cataloging details of a life he'd had no part in building. He noticed the small things. The child's bike on the porch, just one bike even though there were two boys, probably something they shared. The window boxes that held flowers but needed weeding. A basketball hoop mounted over the garage, the net frayed but functional. Evidence of care within constraints, of making do, of small joys extracted from limited resources. His phone vibrated, a text from his lawyer. Confirming 4:12 p.m., press conference scheduled for 4:45. See you there. Ethan looked from his phone to the house and back again. The distance between these 2 points, between this modest home with its shared bicycle and his corporate headquarters with its marble lobby, felt unbridgeable. He'd spent 6 years building toward today, toward becoming someone who mattered in ways that could be measured in dollars and headlines. And Emma had spent 6 years building something else entirely, something that couldn't be quantified or publicized but might actually matter more. He thought about the necklace he'd glimpsed yesterday, the one he'd given her during a weekend trip to the coast. She'd said it was too expensive, and he'd said nothing was too expensive if it made her happy. She'd worn it every day after that. He'd assumed she would have thrown it away or sold it after they'd ended. But she hadn't. She'd kept it. Kept wearing it. What did that mean? A car drove past and Ethan realized how exposed he was, how easy it would be for Emma to look out her window and see him standing there. The thought made him move, walking quickly back toward his car with no clearer understanding of what to do next, but with an absolute certainty that he couldn't walk away. Not again. Not when he'd seen their faces, heard their laughter, witnessed the life that might have had space for him if he'd been brave enough to stay. By the time he reached his car, it was 10:07 a.m. 6 hours and 5 minutes until he was supposed to sign his name to documents that would make him accountable to thousands of people. But first, he needed to be accountable to 3 people who might have needed him all along. Ethan drove aimlessly for 20 minutes before pulling into a coffee shop parking lot. His hands were still shaking. He ordered something he didn't want and sat at a corner table with his laptop, pretending to work while his mind replayed the morning on an endless loop. The boys' synchronized movements, Emma's careful laughter, the single bicycle, the necklace she still wore. His phone kept buzzing with messages he didn't read. Caroline checking in, his assistant confirming details, his lawyer sending last-minute documents to review. Each notification felt like a countdown timer ticking toward an explosion he wasn't ready to contain. At 10:47, Ethan opened his cloud storage and searched through old files he hadn't accessed in years. Found a folder labeled Personal Archive that he'd created during one of those late-night organization binges people do when they're trying to feel in control of chaos. Inside, buried beneath tax returns and apartment leases, he found a subfolder simply titled Emma. He shouldn't have kept these files. Should have deleted them when they'd broken up, should have done the healthy thing and moved on cleanly. But he'd been sentimental in ways he'd never admitted to anyone. The folder contained photos, dozens of them. Emma at the farmer's market holding peaches. Emma asleep on his couch. Emma making that face she made when she was pretending to be annoyed but was actually amused. The digital ghosts of a relationship he'd told himself didn't matter anymore. Then he found the document, a PDF scan of something he'd forgotten about until this moment. The medical report from 6.5 years ago, back when Emma had suggested, almost casually, like she was discussing the weather, that maybe he should get tested. Just to know, she'd said, just so we're making informed choices. He'd been irritated by the suggestion, had felt it as an accusation, as if she was implying something was wrong with him. But he'd gone anyway, mostly to prove her wrong, to show her that he was fine and she was worrying about nothing. The test had been quick, clinical, unmemorable. He'd gotten the results by email 2 weeks later and had barely glanced at them before filing them away and forgetting they existed. Now Ethan opened the PDF with fingers that felt disconnected from his body. The report was 3 pages long, full of medical terminology he'd never bothered to understand. His eyes scanned past the header information, past his name and date of birth, down to the section labeled Results and Interpretation. There, in the 3rd paragraph, was a word he'd never noticed before: inconclusive. Ethan read the sentence 3 times. Initial analysis shows inconclusive results due to sample quality. Repeat testing recommended for definitive assessment. Repeat testing recommended. He'd never done repeat testing. Had taken this single inconclusive result and built an entire assumption on top of it. When Emma had asked about it later, he'd said something vague like, "Everything's fine," because that's what he'd wanted to believe. She'd seemed relieved, or maybe she'd just seemed like someone who'd decided to stop asking questions that might not have good answers. The coffee shop suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too full of people having normal Wednesdays while his entire understanding of the past 6 years was crumbling. Ethan closed his laptop and pressed his forehead against the cool surface of the table. A woman at the next table glanced over, concerned, but he didn't care. Inconclusive. Not, "You can't have children." Not even, "It's unlikely." Just inconclusive. A medical shrug. A request for more information that he'd ignored because it was easier to assume the answer he wanted than to pursue the truth. And Emma. Had she known? Had she seen that word inconclusive and understood what he'd apparently missed? Or had she taken his "everything's fine" at face value and spent the last 6 years believing he couldn't be the father? That it must have been someone else? That she'd been wrong to even wonder? Ethan's phone rang. His lawyer. He let it go to voicemail, then immediately texted, "Running behind on something personal. We'll be there by 4. Don't worry." The lawyer's response came back instantly. "Can't push the time. Press is scheduled. You okay?" "Fine. Just need to handle something. See you at 4. He wasn't fine. He was the opposite of fine. He was a man who'd built a fortune on careful analysis and data-driven decisions. And he'd somehow missed the most important data point of his entire life, because looking at it carefully would have required him to reconsider assumptions he'd found comforting. At 11:30, Ethan made a call he should have made 6 years ago. His doctor, not the clinic where he'd had the original test, but his current physician, someone he trusted. "Dr. Morrison, it's Ethan Cross. I need to ask you about something medical, kind of sensitive." Dr. Morrison's voice was professional but warm. "Of course. What's going on?" Ethan explained about the old test, about the inconclusive result, about the fact that he'd never followed up. He didn't mention Emma or the boys or the reason this suddenly mattered. Dr. Morrison listened without interrupting. "Okay," the doctor said when Ethan finished. "First, inconclusive doesn't mean what most people think it means. It usually indicates a technical issue with the sample, not anything definitive about fertility. You'd need proper testing to know anything real. How long does that take? Depends on what kind of testing. A basic analysis can be done in a few days. More comprehensive testing might take a week or 2. But Ethan, can I ask what's prompting this? After 6 years?" Ethan stared out the coffee shop window at people walking past with their ordinary problems and ordinary lives. "I think I might need to know the truth about something, about someone." There was a pause. "I see. Well, truth is usually better than uncertainty, even when it's hard. Want to come in this week?" "I'm not sure I have a week." "What do you mean?" Ethan checked his watch. 11:47 a.m. 4 hours and 25 minutes until his life changed in ways he'd planned. Unknown amount of time until it changed in ways he hadn't. "I mean, I need to make some decisions very quickly, and I don't know if I can wait for test results to make them." "Then maybe the question isn't what the test will tell you. Maybe it's what you already know in your gut." After he hung up, Ethan sat in his car in the coffee shop parking lot and tried to inventory what he knew versus what he suspected, versus what he was terrified might be true. The facts were limited. The feelings were overwhelming. The timeline was impossible. And somewhere across town, Two boys who might be his sons were sitting in a classroom learning math or reading or whatever 7-year-olds learned, completely unaware that their existence had just detonated someone else's carefully constructed reality. His phone showed 12:33 p.m., 3 hours and 39 minutes. The number felt both infinite and impossibly short. Ethan started the car and began driving back toward Emma's neighborhood, no longer pretending he had any other choice. Ethan sat in his car across from Emma's house for 40 minutes before he found the courage to approach. The street was quiet at midday, most people at work, the neighborhood settling into its weekday rhythm. A mailman made his rounds. Someone's sprinkler clicked back and forth. The normalcy of it all made what he was about to do feel even more surreal. At 1:23 p.m., he finally crossed the street and walked up the cracked concrete path to her front door. The porch swing creaked slightly in the breeze. Up close, he could see details he'd missed from a distance. A child's drawing taped to the inside of the front window, a doormat that said, "Welcome," in faded letters, a small wind chime that made soft metallic sounds. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. Raised it again. This was insane. He had no right to be here, no right to disrupt whatever life she'd built. But he also couldn't unknow what he'd seen, couldn't unthink what he'd thought. The truth was already out there, waiting. The only question was whether he had the courage to meet it. He knocked. 3 soft raps that sounded too loud in the quiet afternoon. For a long moment, nothing. Then footsteps. The door opened and Emma stood there, and for several seconds neither of them spoke. She looked different. Older, obviously. 6 years did that to people. But also stronger somehow. More solid, like she'd been compressed under pressure and had come out denser, more substantial. Her hair was shorter. She wore jeans and a t-shirt that had a small stain near the hem, probably from cooking or cleaning. No makeup. The necklace he'd noticed yesterday rested just below her collarbone, catching the light. Ethan. His name in her mouth sounded like a word in a language she'd once spoken fluently but had mostly forgotten. "What are you doing here?" "I need 5 minutes, please." She didn't move from the doorway. Her hand stayed on the doorframe like she might need to close it quickly. 5 minutes for what? It's been 6 years. What could possibly? "I saw you yesterday, at the crosswalk on Maple and 6th. Something changed in her face. Not surprise exactly. More like resignation, like she'd been waiting for this conversation for so long that its arrival felt almost anticlimactic. "I see." "The boys," Ethan said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Emma, I need to know." She looked at him for a long time, and he watched her cycle through what seemed like a dozen different responses before settling on something that looked like exhaustion. "You need to know. After 6 years, now you need to know." I wasn't." He stopped, started again. "Yesterday was the first time I saw them. I didn't know they existed." "You didn't know because you didn't ask." Her voice was quiet but sharp, each word precisely placed. "You didn't know because you made it very clear that children were not part of your plan. You didn't know because when I tried to tell you, when I tried to have conversations about the future, you shut down or changed the subject or just stopped coming around." "When did you try to tell me?" Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Are you serious right now? You're going to stand on my porch and ask me to defend my timeline? To justify why I didn't chase down a man who'd already made his choice? I never made a choice about this. About them. You made a choice about us. That was the same thing." The older woman from this morning appeared behind Emma, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Emma? Everything okay?" "It's fine, Mom. Just an old friend." The word friend landed like a stone. Emma's mother looked at Ethan with the kind of assessment that mothers specialize in, the kind that sees through expensive clothes and polished appearances straight down to character. Whatever she saw didn't seem to impress her. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." Emma stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind her. "You have 3 minutes now. I need to pick the boys up from school at 2:45. "Are they mine?" You don't get to ask me that. Not like this. Not after showing up unannounced after 6 years. Emma, please. I'm not trying to. I just need to know the truth. The truth. She said it like she was testing the weight of the word. Okay, here's the truth. When I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified. Here's another truth. I called you 4 times that week and you were always too busy to talk. Here's another. By the time I worked up the courage to tell you in person, you'd already told me at that Italian restaurant, remember? That you couldn't imagine having kids, that your company was your baby, that anyone who expected more from you was being unrealistic. Ethan felt each sentence like a blow. He did remember that conversation, though he'd framed it differently in his memory. In his version, he'd been honest about his priorities. In hers, he'd apparently been closing a door she'd needed to stay open. I was scared, he said quietly. I was 29 and building something from nothing and terrified of failing. That doesn't mean I wouldn't have what? Stepped up? Been responsible? Ethan, I didn't need grand gestures. I needed someone who wanted to be there, not someone who had to convince himself it was the right thing to do. So you just decided for both of us? You decided I didn't deserve to know? Emma's eyes flashed. I decided that 2 children deserved a parent who chose them, not one who resented them. I decided that I wasn't going to spend my life watching you look at your sons and see an obligation instead of a gift. They're boys? Both of them? She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, they were wet. Yes, twins, Sawyer and Mason. They're 7. They're smart and funny and kind. They like dinosaurs and soccer and building things. They ask about their father sometimes, and I tell them he wasn't ready to be a dad, which is true. I don't tell them he's a billionaire who went on to build an empire, because that would just make them wonder why we're barely getting by. The words hit Ethan like physical blows. He gripped the porch railing to steady himself. I would have helped, financially, if you'd just told me. I didn't want your money. I wanted a partner. There's a difference. They stood in silence for a moment. A car passed. The wind chime continued its small song. Somewhere inside the house, a timer went off and was quickly silenced. What do you want, Ethan? Really? Why are you here? He looked at her. This woman who'd once known him better than anyone, who'd left him because she'd had the courage to want more than he was capable of giving. I want to know if I've spent 6 years missing something I should have fought for. You can't fight for something after the war is over. Then let me at least know what I lost, Emma, please. Are they mine? She was quiet for so long, he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. What difference would it make? You have a life, a career, a fiancé, I'm assuming, based on the ring I saw through your car window yesterday. What would you do with this information? I don't know. But I can't move forward without knowing if I'm leaving people behind who needed me. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. If you want answers, there's a right way to do this. Medical tests, legal documentation, time. It's not something you can solve in an afternoon before your next meeting. I know, His phone buzzed. His lawyer again. 1:58 p.m., 2 hours and 14 minutes. I have something today, something big, something that's going to make my life very public. If there's any possibility that those boys are mine, I need to know before that happens. So this is about protecting yourself, about managing your image. No, it's about not wanting them to find out from a stranger that their father is someone they saw on TV. Emma studied his face like she was trying to read a map to somewhere she'd been before, but couldn't quite remember how to reach. Finally, she said, "Meet me at 5:30, the park on Riverside, the one with the blue playground. I'll bring documentation that might help. No promises beyond that." Why 5:30? Because the boys have soccer practice until 5:15, and whatever conversation we're going to have, they don't need to be part of it yet. Maybe not ever. That depends on you. Thank you. Don't thank me. You haven't heard what I have to say yet. She went back inside without another word. Ethan stood on the porch for a moment, then walked back to his car on legs that felt made of something other than bone and muscle. He sat behind the wheel and checked the time. 2:03 p.m. 2 hours and 9 minutes until a meeting that would change his life. 3 hours and 27 minutes until a conversation that might change it even more. Ethan arrived at his office building at 3:47 p.m., 25 minutes before the signing. The lobby felt different than it had that morning, or maybe he was different, and the marble and glass and expensive art just looked the same as always. His assistant met him at the elevator with a concerned expression and a folder of papers. "Mr. Cross, your lawyer has been trying to reach you. The press is already setting up in the conference room. Are you okay? You look..." "I'm fine, Jessica. Just had something personal to handle." She didn't look convinced, but knew better than to push. "They need you on the 14th floor. Everyone's waiting." The elevator ride up felt like ascending toward an execution. Ethan watched the numbers climb and thought about parallel timelines, about the version of this day he'd imagined a week ago versus the one he was actually living. In that other timeline, this moment would have been pure triumph. In this one, it felt like standing at a crossroads where every direction led toward some form of loss. The 14th floor conference room was exactly as he'd pictured it. His lawyer, Marcus, stood by the windows in an expensive suit that somehow looked modest compared to what it represented. 3 journalists sat at one end of the long table, recording devices already out. His chief financial officer was there, along with 2 representatives from the investment group. Everyone turned when he entered, their faces showing various degrees of anticipation and professional enthusiasm. "Ethan, good to see you." Marcus extended a hand. "We were getting worried." "Sorry. Had an emergency this morning. I'm here now." "Everything resolved?" Ethan thought about Emma on her porch, about the 3 hours and 27 minutes that had somehow shrunk to less than 2. "Not exactly." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, some calculus happening behind his eyes. "Do we need to talk privately before we proceed?" "Maybe. Yeah. Can you give me 5 minutes?" Marcus excused them both, and they stepped into a smaller conference room down the hall. The moment the door closed, Marcus's professional demeanor dropped slightly. "What's going on? You look like you're about to tell me someone died." "I need to know something legal, hypothetically. I don't like the sound of this. If someone, hypothetically, discovered they might have children they didn't know about and they were about to become a public figure, what would be the responsible way to handle that?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, clinical. "Are we talking about you?" "Hypothetically." "Ethan, if we're going to have this conversation, it can't be hypothetical. I'm your lawyer, but I'm also about to watch you sign documents that make you accountable to a lot of people. I need to know if there's something that could become a problem." Ethan sank into a chair and told him, "Not everything. Not the details of Emma's face or the sound of the boy's laughter, but the facts. The crosswalk. The timing. The inconclusive test from 6 years ago. The meeting scheduled for 5:30. When he finished, Marcus was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Okay. First, legally, until paternity is established, there's nothing to disclose. Second, personally, this is going to complicate your life in ways you can't imagine. Third, professionally, if this comes out later and it looks like you knew and hid it, that's worse than dealing with it now. So what do I do? That depends on what you want the answer to be. Do you want those boys to be yours?" The question hit Ethan in a place he hadn't expected. He realized he'd been so focused on the logistics, the timing, the implications, that he hadn't actually asked himself that fundamental question. Did he want this? Not did he owe it? Not was it the right thing? But did he actually want to be a father to 2 7-year-old boys he'd never met? The answer came faster than he expected. "Yes, I think I do." "Then you need time to do this right. Time to get proper testing done. Time to talk to the mother about what any of this would actually look like. Time to consider how this affects your fiancé, your company, your life. You can't get that time if you sign these papers today and immediately become public property." "So you're saying I should postpone?" I'm saying you should make a decision based on what matters most. If it's the company, sign. If it's those potential kids, don't. You can't have it both ways. Ethan checked his watch. 4:04 p.m. 8 minutes until everything was supposed to begin. He thought about the journalist in the other room, about the investment group, about all the people whose plans and expectations rested on him doing exactly what he'd said he would do. Then he thought about Emma waiting in a park with documentation that might prove he'd spent 6 years being a father without knowing it. How much damage would postponing cause? Financially? Some. The market doesn't like uncertainty. But your company is solid. You'd survive it. Reputationally? Depends on how you frame it. If you postpone for personal reasons without explanation, people will speculate. If you wait until you have answers and then address everything at once, you control the narrative. And if I sign today and deal with the personal stuff later, then you're betting that you can compartmentalize well enough to handle whatever comes out of that meeting at 5:30 while also managing your new responsibilities as a public CEO. That's a hell of a bet. Ethan stood and walked to the window. From this height, the city looked orderly, comprehensible. Traffic moved in predictable patterns. People followed rules. Everything made sense from far enough away. Up close, though, life was messier. People made mistakes, they left things undone, they built empires while missing what mattered. His phone buzzed. Caroline. Hey, babe. I know you're about to go in. Just wanted to say I'm proud of you. This is your moment. Enjoy it. Love you. He stared at the message. She had no idea that his moment was actually a decision point that might end up costing him her, or the company, or both. She loved a version of him that made sense, that fit into her plans, that didn't come with complicated ex-girlfriends and potential children from relationships she'd never heard about. Marcus, if I postpone, what do I tell them? The truth. Just not all of it yet. Tell them there's a personal matter that requires immediate attention. Tell them you want to proceed but need to resolve something first. Give them a new timeline, 2 weeks, maybe 3. That gives you time to get answers and figure out what you're actually dealing with. And if they pull the deal, then they weren't the right partners anyway. Anyone who can't handle a brief delay for legitimate personal reasons isn't someone you want to be in business with for the next decade. Ethan looked at his reflection in the window glass. He looked tired. He looked scared. He looked nothing like a man about to become a captain of industry. But maybe that was okay. Maybe looking certain all the time was what had gotten him into this mess in the first place. He turned back to Marcus. Tell them I need to postpone. Don't give details. Just say I have a personal matter that needs to be resolved before I can commit to the increased public scrutiny. Offer 2 weeks from today for a new signing. You're sure? No. But I'm sure that I can't stand in front of those cameras and pretend everything is fine when I'm about to find out my entire understanding of my own life might be wrong. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, I'll handle it. It's going to be uncomfortable. Most important things are. They walked back to the conference room together. Ethan could feel his heart hammering against his ribs. When they entered, everyone looked up expectantly. Marcus cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. Mr. Cross has asked me to inform you that due to an urgent personal matter, we'll need to postpone today's signing. We're proposing 2 weeks from today, same time, pending resolution of the issue in question. The room erupted in overlapping questions. Ethan held up his hand. I understand this is unexpected and inconvenient. I take full responsibility for any disruption this causes. I'm committed to moving forward, but I need a brief window to handle something that can't wait. I appreciate your patience and understanding. One of the journalists spoke up. Can you tell us anything about the nature of this personal matter? I'm afraid not at this time. Is it health-related? I'm not comfortable providing details yet. When I have more information, I'll share what's appropriate. The meeting dispersed in a fog of confusion and barely concealed frustration. Ethan fielded terse questions and accepted tight-lipped acknowledgments until finally the room cleared, and he was alone with Marcus, who looked simultaneously proud and concerned. That took guts, Marcus said. Stupid guts, maybe, but guts nonetheless. Thanks, I think. You need to call your fiancée before she hears about this some other way. Ethan checked his phone. 4:47 p.m. 43 minutes until he was supposed to meet Emma. The idea of explaining any of this to Caroline made his chest tighten, but Marcus was right. She deserved to know something, even if he couldn't tell her everything yet. He stepped into an empty office and dialed. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with excitement. How'd it go? Are you officially a mogul now? Caroline, I need to talk to you about something. The brightness dimmed. What's wrong? Did something happen with the deal? I postponed it. There's something I need to handle first. Silence. Then, carefully, what kind of something? Ethan sat down heavily in an office chair that wasn't his. Through the window, the city was starting its transition into evening, the light going gold and soft. Something from my past. Someone, actually. An ex-girlfriend. An ex-girlfriend. Caroline's voice had gone flat, neutral in the way people get when they're trying not to jump to conclusions but are already halfway there. Okay. What about her? I can't give you all the details yet because I don't have them myself. But I saw her yesterday, and there's a possibility, just a possibility, that some things about our past might be more complicated than I thought. Ethan, you're scaring me. Just tell me what's going on. He closed his eyes. She has children, twins, boys, and there's a chance, I don't know for sure yet, but there's a chance they might be mine. The silence that followed was so complete he thought the call had dropped. Then Caroline's voice came back, very quiet. You have children? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to find out. How do you not know if you have children? We broke up 6 years ago. I never knew she was pregnant. I'm only finding this out now. 6 years. Caroline said it like she was trying to do math that didn't add up. You've potentially had children for 6 years and didn't know? I didn't know to look. We ended badly. She never contacted me. Or maybe you made it really easy for her not to. The words stung because they were probably true. That's fair. Is it? Is any of this fair? We're supposed to get married in 8 months, Ethan. We've been planning a life together. And now you're telling me that life might include 2 children you forgot to mention? I didn't forget. I didn't know. That's not better. That might actually be worse. Her voice was shaking now, anger mixing with hurt. What kind of person doesn't know they have kids? What kind of relationship did you have with this woman where she could disappear with your children and you just... What? Moved on? Built a company? Found someone new? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Help me understand, because from here it looks like you were so focused on your career that you didn't notice you might have destroyed someone else's life. Ethan felt each word like a slap, accurate and painful. You're right. I was selfish. I was 29 and ambitious, and I convinced myself that anything that didn't serve my goals didn't matter. I was wrong. Caroline was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, but colder. Where are you right now? Still at the office. And where are you going? I'm meeting her in 40 minutes. She has some documentation, medical records maybe, things that might help us figure out the truth. And then what? I don't know. If they're mine, I need to figure out what that means, what my responsibilities are, what role I can play in their lives, if any. What about your responsibilities to me? What about the life we're building? That matters too. You matter too. But not enough to tell me about this before you postponed a multi-million-dollar deal and potentially blew up your company's future. I only found out yesterday, Caroline. I've been trying to figure out what's real and what's not. And you figured you'd just handle it alone? That I didn't need to know until after you'd made all your decisions? He heard the real hurt beneath her anger. She was right to feel excluded. Right to feel like he'd relegated her to a supporting role in a drama she should have been part of from the beginning. I'm sorry. I should have told you last night. I was trying to protect you from something that might not even be real. Or you were trying to protect yourself from having to face it. That hit closer to home than he wanted to admit. Maybe both. Caroline sighed, a sound that carried exhaustion and disappointment in equal measure. I need some time to think, to process this. You should go to your meeting, find out the truth. But Ethan? When you're done finding out who you were 6 years ago, you need to figure out who you want to be now. Because the man I agreed to marry was someone I thought I knew. And right now, I'm not sure I know you at all. Caroline, call me when you have answers, real ones. Not theories or maybes, actual answers. She hung up before he could respond. Ethan sat holding the phone, feeling the full weight of what he'd just lost or was in the process of losing. Caroline wasn't wrong about any of it. He had been selfish. He had compartmentalized. He had built a life that depended on never looking back at the wreckage he'd left behind. His phone showed 5:11 p.m. 19 minutes. He stood and straightened his tie, a gesture that felt absurd given the circumstances. What did it matter if he looked professional when his entire life was coming apart? Marcus found him in the hallway. How'd it go? About as well as you'd expect. She leave you? She's thinking about it, can't say I blame her. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. Postponing the deal, I mean. Better to know the truth than build on a lie. Doesn't feel right yet. It will, or it won't. But at least you'll know you faced it. Ethan nodded and headed for the elevator. The ride down felt slower than the ride up, gravity working differently on descent. When he reached the parking garage, he sat in his car for 5 minutes, just breathing, trying to steady himself for whatever was coming next. At 5:26 p.m., he pulled into the parking lot at Riverside Park. The blue playground was visible from the entrance, occupied by a few young children and their tired-looking parents. Emma wasn't there yet. Ethan found a bench with a view of the parking lot and sat down to wait, his hands clasped between his knees, his heart doing things that didn't feel entirely healthy. A minivan pulled in at 5:32. Emma got out alone, carrying a manila folder that looked worn at the edges. She saw him and walked over with the gait of someone heading toward something unpleasant, but necessary. She sat down on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining distance. Thanks for coming, Ethan said. I almost didn't. Why did you? She was quiet for a moment, watching a little girl on the swings. Because I'm tired of carrying this alone. And because maybe you deserve a chance to be better than you were. She handed him the folder. Birth certificates, medical records from the pregnancy, photos from the delivery, timeline documentation, everything you'd need to see that the timing works out. Ethan opened the folder with trembling hands. The first document was a birth certificate, Sawyer James, born October 14th. He did the math backwards. Conception would have been mid-January, right when he'd been telling himself their relationship was already over, even though they kept falling back into bed together. The second certificate, Mason Alexander, same date, same hospital. The line for father's name on both certificates was blank. You left it blank, he said quietly. What was I supposed to put? The name of a man who'd told me he didn't want kids, who'd made it clear I was asking for too much by wanting a future. Ethan stared at the blank line where his name should have been. 7 years of existence, reduced to an absence. He flipped through the medical records, ultrasound images showing 2 tiny shapes, prenatal visit summaries, a hospital discharge form. Each document was a piece of a story he hadn't been part of, evidence of a reality that had continued without him. I would have helped, he said, knowing how inadequate the words were. If you'd told me. Would you? Really? Emma's voice wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Or would you have written a check and convinced yourself that was enough? Would you have shown up to doctor's appointments while building your empire? Would you have been there at 3 a.m. when they both had colic and I was so exhausted I couldn't remember my own name? Ethan had no answer because she was right. He could picture the version of himself from 6 years ago, and that man would have done exactly what she described, thrown money at the problem and called it responsibility. I was a coward, he said quietly. I built my entire life around avoiding anything that might slow me down or make me vulnerable. I told myself it was ambition, but it was just fear. At least you can admit it now. He looked at her profile, at the way the evening light caught in her hair. Why are you showing me this? Why now, after keeping it secret for so long? Emma was quiet for a long time, watching children play on equipment that had seen better days. Because yesterday when Mason looked at your car, he asked me if that man was his father. Out of nowhere, just asked. Like some part of him recognized something. She wiped her eyes. I've spent 6 years telling myself I made the right choice. That protecting them from someone who didn't want them was the loving thing to do. But maybe I was just protecting myself from the possibility that you'd changed, or that you'd try and fail, and I'd have to watch them be disappointed. What did you tell him, when he asked? I said I didn't know who he was talking about, but he looked at me the way kids do when they know you're lying. He's been quiet ever since, more than usual. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest. A child who'd never met him was somehow looking for him anyway. I want to know them. I want to try. Trying isn't enough. They need consistency, not someone who shows up when it's convenient. I know. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for a chance. Emma turned to face him directly. If you do this, if you come into their lives, you don't get to leave when it gets hard. You don't get to prioritize your company or your reputation or your comfort. You're committing to 2 boys who've already spent 7 years wondering why they don't have what other kids have. If you're going to break their hearts eventually, better to do it now before they know your name. I won't break their hearts. You can't promise that. Nobody can. Then let me promise this. I'll show up. Every time. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it costs me something. It's going to cost you everything. Your fiancé might leave. Your investors might get nervous. Your perfect image might crack. Good. Maybe that image needed to crack. Emma studied his face like she was trying to read a book in a language she'd once known but had forgotten. We need proper testing first, legal documentation. Time to figure out what this looks like before we tell them anything. How long? A couple weeks, maybe. The testing is quick, but we need to be sure. And I need to talk to a lawyer about what your rights are, what my protections are. This isn't something we can rush. I postponed my deal. Gave myself 2 weeks to figure this out. You postponed $1 billion deal for this? For them. For the possibility of them. Something shifted in Emma's expression, some wall coming down slightly. That might be the first truly selfless thing I've ever seen you do. Then I have a lot of catching up to do. They sat in silence, watching the sun sink lower. Children were being collected by parents, called away from play toward dinner and homework, and normal Wednesday evening routines. Ethan wondered what Sawyer and Mason were doing right now. Homework at Emma's mother's house, probably. Completely unaware that their entire world might be about to change. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Why did you keep the necklace? Emma's hand went automatically to her throat, touching the small pendant. I kept a lot of things, photos, letters. The shirt you left at my place that last week. I told myself it was just stuff I hadn't gotten around to throwing away, but really, I guess I wanted to remember that someone saw me once, even if they didn't stay. I saw you. I was just too scared to admit what that meant. And now I'm terrified. But I'm more afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering what I missed. Emma stood up. I need to get home. My mom's been watching them all day and she's got her book club tonight. Ethan stood too. Can I call you? To check in? To figure out next steps? Yeah. But Ethan, don't call unless you mean it. Don't start something you can't finish. These boys have been through enough uncertainty. I mean it. She nodded and walked back to her minivan. Ethan watched her drive away, then sat back down on the bench as the park emptied around him. He pulled out his phone and looked at his messages. 6 from his assistant, 3 from board members, 1 from Caroline. I'm staying at my sister's tonight. We'll talk when you're ready. He typed back. The boys are mine, the timing, the evidence. It all lines up. I don't have DNA confirmation yet, but I know. I can feel it. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry for all of this. But I can't walk away from them. I hope you can understand. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. Then he opened a new message to Marcus. Emma confirmed the timeline. We're setting up proper testing, but I'm as sure as I can be. What do I need to do legally to make sure I can be part of their lives? Marcus's response came quickly. Call me tomorrow. We'll figure it out. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing today. Ethan sat in the empty park as streetlights flickered on. He thought about the version of his life he'd been planning. The deal, the marriage, the carefully curated public image. That life had looked so clear, so achievable. This new life looked messy and complicated and full of ways he could fail. But somewhere in this city, two boys existed who had his eyes and his laugh and half his genetic code. They were doing homework or playing before bed or asking their mother questions she'd been answering alone for 7 years. They were real in ways that deals and headlines and reputation could never be. Ethan stood and walked back to his car. Tomorrow he'd start the process of becoming what he should have been all along. It wouldn't be easy. Caroline might be gone. Investors might lose faith. The pristine narrative he'd built about himself would develop cracks that could never be fully repaired. But as he drove through the city toward an apartment that suddenly felt too empty, Ethan realized something that should have been obvious all along. The cost of running from the truth was always higher than the price of facing it. He'd lost 6 years. He'd missed first words and first steps and first days of school. He'd let fear masquerade as ambition and cowardice dress up as pragmatism. He couldn't get those years back, but he could choose differently going forward. He could be the father those boys deserved, even if he had no idea how. He could trade the applause of strangers for the harder work of showing up every day for people who had every reason not to trust him. When Ethan finally reached home, he didn't go inside immediately. He sat in his car in the parking garage and let himself feel everything he'd been holding back. Grief for the time lost, fear of the responsibility ahead, hope that maybe it wasn't too late to become someone worth knowing. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to get confirmation, to figure out logistics, to prepare for a life that looked nothing like what he'd planned. 2 weeks until he signed papers that would change his public status. But the change that mattered had already happened, in a crosswalk on an ordinary Tuesday, when two boys looked at him and something in his DNA recognized something in theirs. The truth had arrived. And for the first time in 6 years, Ethan stopped running and turned to meet it head-on. Ethan Cross learned what most of us spend our entire lives avoiding, that the things we run from don't disappear. They simply wait for us in places we never expect to look. He built a fortune by moving forward, by never glancing in the rearview mirror, by telling himself that success was enough. But two boys at a crosswalk taught him what no business deal ever could, that some debts can't be paid with money, and some absences leave wounds that compound with interest over time. The hardest question isn't whether Ethan made the right choice by postponing his deal. The hardest question is the one we have to ask ourselves. What are we running from right now? What truth are we avoiding because facing it would cost us the comfortable lie we've built our lives around? How many crosswalks have we passed without really looking at who's on the other side? Ethan had every reason to keep driving, a company to protect, a reputation to maintain, a future that looked perfect on paper. But he stopped. He turned around. He chose the messy, uncertain, terrifying work of showing up for people he'd convinced himself didn't need him. We all have a moment like Ethan's crosswalk, a place where the past and present collide, where we have to decide if we're brave enough to face what we've left behind. The question isn't whether you'll get it right the first time. The question is whether you'll find the courage to try when it matters most. If this story made you think about the choices you've made, the people you've walked away from, or the second chances you're afraid to take, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Follow this channel for more stories that challenge us to be better than we were yesterday. Like this video if it moved you. And comment below, what would you have done in Ethan's place? Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is admit we don't have all the answers, and choose to show up anyway.